Hi everyone, welcome to the quarterfinals of KLOC 2018. My name is Sharika, I'm your chair for today. Alright, so everyone's ready? Cool. So hi, welcome to quarterfinals of KLOC. Congratulations to all the teams that went through. My name is Sharika, I'll be your chair for today. Paneling with me are Ben and Leomar. In opening government, we have IIUM FF Squad. In opening opposition, we have IIUM. In closing government, we have Causeway, Rusty, and in closing opposition, we have flying Indomie monsters. So on the motion, this House believes that developing countries should adopt strict capital controls over domestic investors investing abroad. Let's call upon the Prime Minister to start the debate. Here.
A country is at a standstill when domestic investors think that their opportunities lie elsewhere. Local markets never flourish, and you require strict capital controls in order to change that. There are two clarifications that need to be made in this debate. The first is that we think that this debate happens at the standpoint in a lot of developing countries, and that we would not allow a lot of the local investors within these domestic investors to invest elsewhere except within their own countries. So firstly, let's characterize how these developing countries look like. A lot of the times, the developing countries are resource rich, i.e. they are rare in a lot of materials, raw materials like earth, minerals, oils, or at the very least, manpower. The second thing that must know is that most of these domestic markets are at the infancy stage, or they're more likely underdeveloped in status quo, because there is a large, huge potential to tap within their particular industries, and a lot of domestic investors sometimes don't take that particular step in order to flourish these particular industry, right? So the problem within status quo is that there is a lot of capital flight that makes a lot of these industries remain at the infancy or underdeveloped stage. And it makes it extremely difficult for them to move forward from here. We think that a lot of money is not invested here, but invested elsewhere, i.e. in India's steel industry flourishing within Britain, but not particularly in India. I'll present two arguments before I take the TOI, right? So the first is, what is the moral responsibility of domestic investors to invest domestically? But the second thing is, I'll be illustrating the sense of urgency and why is there an urgent need to bring forth and bring up these domestic markets in the first place. So the first is, let's illustrate what is the moral responsibility of domestic investors to invest domestically. The first is that a lot of the times the people who live within these developing countries have rich people residing within these developing countries. And a lot of the times they have benefited from a lot of the colonization that happened in the past. Oftentimes these are people who are proxies to colonizers, or secondly, they're usually warlords of the past. They never gain the kind of property within these instances morally, and it usually is gained through things like plunder, theft, or oppression. I think that in order for us to ensure that there is continual development, the state must rectify this oppression through the strict capital controls that happen in status quo that we want to implement. Not yet, right? But the second thing is, what do we mean by this? We think that while we can't save a lot of these developing countries from the harms of previous colonization and atrocities, we want to ensure there's at least a lot of inflow of money that we can save for investment of the country, or at the very least, the money stays within that country and there isn't capital flight within those particular instances. But the second principle and analysis to support this principle is in terms of that property right is not an absolute. In most instances, there are things that we do in order to make sure that property is inevitably in our own country. So for example, things like inheritance laws or property laws to ensure that we put restriction or regulation in how individuals move that particular property. And I think that that is perfectly in line in principle in terms of how we can control these properties and how they move about, right? So in the worst case scenario that the domestic markets don't get to invest elsewhere, they can still invest locally, and that helps in their local economy. The conclusion of this particular first argument is that locking domestic investors rectify the mishaps previously that happened from states due to colonization, and I think that these states have the ability to do this in order to ensure that their country booms economically, right? So the second argumentation here is in terms of why is there an urgent necessity to bring up these domestic markets? Before that, sure.
Where does the profit from these investments go?
The profit from these investments would just like the profit from these investments would stay locally, right? It's considering the fact these domestic investors would stay in their country. I don't think that's a problem. So the first is in status quo. What is the problem in terms of when these industries stay and they don't flourish? The first thing is we become too dependent on the foreign entities and foreign direct investments that come, and this results in a lot of harms, right? The first is the fact that there is lack of competition. So when there is FDI coming in from different countries or foreign investors coming in, we never are able to compete with them. That means that we are never able to do things like delve into the ethics or delve into how the industry particularly operates, because it's always dictated by the person who comes in terms of dictating our particular industry, right? So how do we then rectify this particular situation? I think that when domestic investors continuously invest in the market, a lot of things change. The first is that we organically become the leaders of that particular market. That means that we allow for things to be produced and we can dictate how much they're produced, where they are outsourced, and things like that. We think that it makes it a lot easier for the booming of our particular economy, because now we have a say in comparison to wanting to compete with those other big industries that exist within status quo. But we'll also posit to you the worst case. In instances where individuals have to co-opt the benefit of, have to co-opt or like have to work together with some foreign entities, because note that the clarification in this debate is that we would still allow foreign investors to come in within our particular country, but the additional benefit is that those domestic investors can't go out, so that means we have more capital inflow, right? We think that at the very worst, we would also co-opt on a joint venture with a lot of these foreign investors to ensure that there is some form of cooperation. But the prerequisite to that form of co-opting is making sure that your particular economy is booming and blossoming as well. And I think that that's an exclusive benefit we get in the world of opening government that we can't get in the world of opposition. So what does this look like? I think that this looks like a lot of corporations not being the only dominant ones that exist within that particular developing country. So for example, Pfizer being the only strong pharmaceutical industry that exists within one country wouldn't be the only one there. I think that when at the point in time when domestic investors were to continuously help flourish their economy or flourish their investment, it's a lot easier for you to see more things like competition, or you'll see more individuals innovating or have more local startups within that particular developing industry. Why is this environment different in comparison to the normal economic market that we currently live in, the climate that we are currently experiencing? Because domestic investors now, and note that the characterization of these domestic investors, considering that they can funnel in and pump in money in other countries, that means they are rich in resources, money, the fact that they have networking and have established companies, means that you would benefit off of all of these things if they had just stayed within your particular country, right? The fact that India would definitely benefit in the restructuring of the steel industry rather than their steel magnet being invested in Britain. That causes a lot of capital outflow in terms of how people benefit from it. So the conclusion of these two things is that, firstly, I think there would be more companies within that particular industry that would help in terms of your economy. But the second is, I think that domestic investors will also be a lot better in bringing in FDI with the networking and the money and resources that they have. For all of these reasons, go with side opening government.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Now let's call upon the leader of opposition. Thank you.
Madam Chair, there was two important characterizations brought forward by my Prime Minister, which was largely ignored by leader of opposition. First of all, the characteristic of developing countries which are rich in resources, but they are underutilized or were not utilized properly. And most industry in that particular countries are either at the infancy stage or underdeveloped due to the lack of capital that was existing in that particular country. Then the debate becomes, how do we best utilize or how do we best use that particular industry or resources at the end of the day that will benefit your own domestic market. So there need to be some economic model coming from them that will explain to us like how we will later on encourage or flourish that particular market, because this debate obviously take in the part of context of how do we best help developing countries. Now, a few rebuttals before I move on to argumentation. So, the first problem highlighted by side opposition was, if no one wants to invest in your local market, you wouldn't be able to get FDI. But that's exactly my point. If your local industry or your infant industry is seen weak, it wouldn't become a precursor for countries overseas to come in and invest in your particular industry to begin with. Sit down. Hence, in order for us to either rejuvenate or in order for us to create that particular industry to begin with, we need the strong support of rich oligarchs, domestic investors to build up these particular markets or build up at least the structure of it to create an attractive environment where even foreign direct investments are attracted to come and invest in your particular country. But then we get this weird argument coming from them that says that, oh, if we have if we invest elsewhere, like if domestic investors are able to invest overseas, we will help to improve our GDP. This clearly explains their lack of understanding of how economy works. GDP is like gross domestic product produced, and therefore, sit down, and therefore you need to produce domestically in order for you to hike up your GDP. And why is hiking up your GDP is extremely important, especially for developing countries. The benefit of having a strong GDP will also ensure that your credit ratings will also be extremely high. Credit rating high means your ability to get loans from either IMF or from World Bank means you are at a lower interest rate, which means the developing of your countries are at a much exponential rate in contrast to allowing capital flight and lower credit rating. The conclusion of that particular argument here is, how do we ensure the best way to ensure a stronger GDP is by ensuring stronger domestic markets, and therefore we think that the best way is for us to lock down domestic investors. But the next part of the argumentation coming from them is, oh, but if local businesses go international, they are now become well known and help our country. But that only benefit that particular individual per se, but doesn't really help the growth of the local market. For example, Jimmy Choo investing in like fashion areas like Paris and in London, but we Malaysians don't see the direct benefit of him becoming famous or known worldwide. And therefore, this is the huge problem coming from that. Now, argumentation, two different levels. Number one, why is it a moral duty of domestic investors to help locally? But first, before I extend on the argument that was brought forward by Umar, I think there was a lecture or no response altogether in regards to the principal argumentation brought forward in regards to how this analyzing rich domestic investors become rich in the first place. Umar forwarded you to two important things. Like they use these particular resources to make them become rich. Either they become proxies of colonizers or they are from royal family, hence why they are rich in nature. But the added material coming from my side is they use these particular resources for them to become well-known internationally, which means not only that, they also have the ability to network with other countries. But the problem right now that we see in status quo is they're misusing this particular opportunity that was given to them by investing internationally rather than locally. Therefore, we solve that particular problem by bringing that. So on a moral level, we think it is imperative for the government to rectify this particular issue of capital flight, and therefore they should remain domestically. Before that, yes.
Well, on a moral level, sir, if I already paid huge amounts of taxes to the government when I earn money, why do I still owe more to the government?
In order for you to tax a particular person, that person have to be either your citizens or stay in your country and earning there. You can't tax something that was earned in America, or you can't tax something that was earned in London. Therefore, your argumentation doesn't make sense. The only way for us to fully maximize the potential of taxing them or getting some amount of money back towards rejuvenation of the industry is by making sure that their money that they earn domestically remains at the domestic market and invested domestically, because obviously they don't want their money to remain stagnant and they need to use their money somehow. But let's talk about how, when they're having these rich and influential domestic investors benefit developing countries in terms of creating better market regulations. So there are two important things that you have to note in this debate. Most developing countries either have weak market regulations or are tainted with corruption, hence making it obviously unattractive towards a lot of foreign direct investment and so on. But how do we change that? Once we enact a policy that ensures that rich domestic investors stay and need to flourish within their own domestic market, you create an incentive for them to create a stable and much more attractive market that tries to fix the two above problem that I mentioned beforehand. Because this is the only way for them to either invest and able to make their money grow, because they need a much functioning market economy or functioning industry for them to flourish. So they have a vested interest to lobby for such change to happen. But even if that's not true, in order for them to grow their particular capital, they need foreign direct investment to come and join venture with them. So in order for foreign direct investment to even come into the country, you need to create a particular healthy industry to begin with. Therefore, there's already a market incentive for that particular thing to happen. But what is the eventual trickle-down effect when you have a stronger domestic market? This will eventually give you greater negotiation power in terms of when you join free trade agreement with other countries. It is almost non-existent currently because you have such a weak economy. This is what enables Sri Lanka to become like slaves to China. Our policy destroys this particular element. Thank you. Operating government's case is dependent upon the feasibility of you investing locally, and for that market to be able to flourish to a point where you're able to fix all those problems and to be able to attract those FDIs to come. I'll give you reasons as to why all this won't happen. Therefore, they cannot claim that FDIs will come. They cannot claim that these rich people in that country will be able to fix everything and clear corruption in that country, right? If they're not able to make money to begin with, right? So why is that necessarily true? I'll engage with that first. What they told us that these rich local people should invest locally. I think that's problematic because one, you don't necessarily have the industries within your country. You may have the resources, but you don't necessarily have those established industries in order for you to be able to harvest those particular resources, right? And I think that in order for you to kick off these particular industries, it needs a lot of capital. And as rich as they want to portray these investors or these local investors to be, we think that foreign investors or people from outside are particularly richer, and they're the only individuals who are capable of building the initial infrastructure which is necessary for you to harvest those resources to begin with. No, thank you. I don't think that your rich local investors are capable of establishing those infrastructure which is necessary for them to harvest those resources to begin with. But I'll explain that further on in my speech as to how do we necessarily change that and allow that to happen. No, thank you. Secondly, we don't think that they end up becoming leaders of the market, because one, if you want to become leaders of your market based on joint ventures, we think that that's when, if you join that venture, a lot of the capacity or like a lot of the control is from the outside people coming in, and you don't necessarily become the leaders of your market. But secondly, we think that if their problem is that there's like
if there are outside people coming in and they've already established themselves in this country, then that would probably mean that there's not much room for you to become a local leader anyway within that market within your country. So I think that's when you don't necessarily become the leaders of your market anyway. No, thank you. So what is the alternative that we will provide? We've told you that we would rather these individuals invest abroad in order for our country to be recognized and to be accepted and to be able to pull these individuals or these FDIs into our own country as well. So no, thank you. I don't think that these people, so the reason why these rich people have all these networks that they have, as what I'm trying to tell you, is because they invest abroad. It's because they shake hands with leaders of corporations from other countries. So I think that in order for you, so basically what I'm trying to say is that you investing abroad is a prerequisite in order for you to be able to attract other people to come and invest in your country. I've already told you that people will not come and invest in your country if you don't invest in theirs, because that's generally how trade works. Where in fact, when people feel that you have contributed to their economy, they feel like it is then therefore worthwhile for them to invest in your own economy. When they see there are rich people within from these small countries coming to them and spending money on them, we think that probably it is a viable option. But when they don't see these people anywhere, when you look at these owners of large, the shareholders of large companies, you don't see anyone from these smaller, from these developing countries. That's when, no, thank you. You're unsure of the capacity of those developing countries in order for them to be able to cater to your needs as a larger corporation, right? So that's why we think that the alternatives that they brought won't necessarily materialize, because just because a local investor doesn't invest abroad doesn't mean that they will suddenly invest locally. Because we think that oftentimes they don't necessarily mind because they have wealth enough for several generations, right? They don't necessarily need to grow. And we think that if the capital that they need to invest, for them to create that infrastructure, is so exponential that they will rather choose not to do it, because for them to gain the broad benefits or the profits of that will be further down the line, which is sort of the benefit that they will feel that that is a worthwhile investment to begin with. So they would rather than just save their own money or use it for their own purposes in comparison to investing in other in their own country. So thank you. In comparison to investing in their own country. But how do we necessarily change all this, and how do we uplift these developing countries, right? We think that, one, you need to be able to bring in these foreign domestic investors into your country. How are we necessarily able to do that? Because Ansha never told us, how do we necessarily make it attractive aside from you being able to expand the market domestically? We think that, no, thank you. Even if you were to invest in your country, the people in that country can't afford to buy the products that you make in your country, right? And we think that's also something that makes your market unattractive. And we think that in order for you to be able to persuade people to come into your country, one of the ways for you to be able to do that, no thank you, is for you to be able to personally know and network with these people abroad to bring them in, right? And that this can only happen. I'm sure that's an opportunity that they wanted also. But they never told us why you're able to do this without actually investing in those companies abroad. How do you invest in those companies abroad to begin with? Well, we also think that investing abroad isn't necessarily bad for your country locally to begin with. We think that is actually a great thing. But before we move on to that, I'll keep closing.
So, a bigger scourge in the developing world is when individuals leave because local markets don't support them. How do you rectify the issue of brain drain when skilled individuals in developing countries just leave because investment opportunities are just not present there?
We think that brain drain isn't something that we necessarily mind. We think that because of the fact that those opportunities aren't existing in our own country now, it's definitely fine for people elsewhere, especially, for example, our investors, where those opportunities aren't existing now, that's when they also necessarily go elsewhere. And I think that even creates better building of infrastructure, as what I told you, in dealing with things like corruption. Because when these leaders realize that all their local investors are leaving because their country is so shit, they'll probably have to change some things in that country, right? And then that's when you actually create that change in order to actually change your country to make it become more attractive at the end of the day, right? But also back to when I was talking about how you investing overseas or investing abroad is actually a good thing. Because when I told them, where does the profit of those investments necessarily go when you invest abroad? Oftentimes, these people, they stay in their local country, but their money they invest abroad, right? And when they get the profits, they bring it back to their country, and they oftentimes spend that money locally, right? Whenever they want to go out with their day-to-day life, they will still be forced to spend it locally as well. And we think that as a matter of having an excess of wealth, we think that because you have an incentive or to become the first movers, these local investors will probably do it anyway, but in order for them to be able to have the excess of wealth, for them to want to be like, you know what, I'll invest in my country anyway because I have a lot of money, is for them to be able to invest abroad first to make that large sum of money for them to reinvest in their home country. They never told us how many people get that large excess sum of money for them to be able to spend in their own country. Because it's not necessarily only the royalty that are rich, right? A lot of individuals, they became rich as a result of them having small businesses in their own country first. Oftentimes, they leave to invest abroad because they feel that the market in their country is, they've already dominated, you know, like it's already saturated, that people no longer buy their products, therefore they have to export, or they have to invest abroad and open factories abroad in order for them to be able to maximize that profit, for them to be able to recontribute back to the country. Those are the reasons why we actually make developing countries better, and the alternatives on OG go to city work.
Crucially, ladies and gentlemen, this debate assesses what is in the best interest of developing nations. Developing nations and the governments of these nations have the duty to make economic decisions that provide the best interest for the people, and that's why we think implementing capital controls is a good idea. Specifically, the unique angle that closing government is going to approach in this debate is we're going to look at the undue influence that multinational corporations and foreign investors, or like the places where domestic investors invest in, have over those developing economies, and why they sometimes use that leverage to hold these developing nations hostage and get and exploit the people and the most vulnerable workers in those grounds. That's what we're going to explain in our extension. Before that, let's deal with opening opposition. I think there's a couple of misconceptions of how economy works under that side of the house. Because the claim from that side is, oh, when we invest outside, we gain some profit and come back, and that's a good thing for us. Firstly, I don't think that's necessarily the case. Right, let's go through this structurally, okay? The first thing to say is that when we implement capital controls, other countries will do it back to us. There are two responses to this. The first is, in regards to other developing nations, we're okay with that. Yes, we're going to lose some trade, regrettably, but on the trade-off is that we get a lot more domestic investors redirecting the investment that would otherwise have gone out of the country back into the nation. So on balance, instead of countries like corporations and people, investors within Malaysia, investing in places such outside, such as in Japan, or such as in China, or such as in US, to redirect those investments back within Malaysia. So even if we make a net loss with regard to total income, we're still okay with it because the development that we have within our country is so much more. The second response we have to this with regards to developed nations, right? And we don't think that they will stop investing within developing countries. Why? Because developing countries have a couple of characteristics that are unique and these developing nations need. Number one, more often not cheap labor. Number two, more often not loss of natural resources. Meaning to say that these developing nations still have a unique competitive advantage that developed nations want within, and they're more likely to trade, they're more likely to continue trading, even if they trade less, right? We still think on the trade-off is better for our own people. Have a seat. The second thing that opening up says, with regards to if we invest abroad, we can bring benefits towards our country. The first thing we'll say with regards to this is that the scale of investment, the scale of profit that you bring back from investing abroad is so much less. Meaning to say that if you invest like, I don't know, a couple billion in a factory in like outside of Malaysia, for instance, in like a foreign company, for instance, the amount of profit, the amount of dividends that you reap from that investment is in the percentage. It's only 2 or 3% a year. Like, sure, these things add up over time, but they also cost associated with it. On a comparative, if you invest domestically, 100% of the investment goes back to Malaysia. More importantly, there are auxiliary benefits to investment. The creation of, or like the investment into creating a factory generates jobs. The investment into a factory generates businesses, creates income for local people. And we think that even if, like, on a balance, the account the same, there is still auxiliary benefits. That means that we should invest locally. But what did they say in response to this? Rich local investors will not be enough to start the infrastructure within our industries that are small. Okay, so we'll have to go slower. We're fine with that. The comparative is almost next to no investment because local investors and domestic investors continuously pump their money out of the country. So even if the development of the industry within our country is slower, we still think it's okay. But more importantly, even if you guys are faster, we would rather have slower development because we have control over who develops and the benefit and prioritize the interests of our own people on the ground. That's why we think it's something that's good. Then they say, which is the weird argument, oh, local investors will stop investing. Why? Like, where else are they going to invest? Like, unless they move out of the country, they have to invest within the local country. That's the beauty of this policy. Like it makes like investments stay within the country. So on a comparative, like sure, we may have less economic revenue coming into the country, but we have more development. But most importantly, we protect the interests of our people. We prioritize the development of our own nation, and that's the benefit that you can never get under that side of the house. Extension, number one, I'll take you up this, I promise, okay? Number one, economic strategy in a world with limited resources. Understand that economies have always been intertwined with politics in this world. What does this mean? The problem with developing economies is that they don't have a lot of economic clout when it comes to export in comparison with other peoples in the world. Why? Because the economic output is smaller, which means that the negotiating power is also lower. Understand also that developing economies have a lot of spare capacity, which often means that because they have resources to be exploited, foreign investors come into our country in order to exploit those resources. Domestic investors who have a mindset that is often selfish. Domestic investors have a mindset that is often selfish and want to prioritize the returns on the investment for themselves. This means that if local economies and local industries may not provide the highest value of profits towards the investors, they would want to invest in foreign investors. This is a bad thing for the country because this means that the control over this money leaves the country. Why is this a bad thing? Or rather, why do they have this mindset? From an individual perspective, if you invest in a foreign place and you're more likely to get a higher percentage of returns, you're more likely to do it. This is a rational assessment. But the second reason why they're likely to do this is because developing economies are often quite volatile, and which think that on a rational basis, they're less likely to want to invest within this nation. Why is this a bad thing? Understand that when other countries have the capability to hold smaller nations hostage, for example, when a lot of African investors, rich African investors invest in China, China has the ability to hold African nations hostage and demand that African governments give them what they want. These large multinational corporations use this power over developing nations to clobber politicians into doing things they're bidding. This is a bad thing for them, right? They can clobber politicians into giving them things such as tax breaks, into giving them such as lax labor laws. They force these countries like Nike forces Kenya, the African nations, to have very lax labor laws and underpay their workers because they want to. You have problems such as corruption that is hard to overcome because these corporations have a power over them. You have things such as suppression of justice, that when workers are abused or workers have injustices committed against them, it is difficult for you to fight against them because they hold so much power over your economy. These countries literally hold you hostage over them, and that is why it's such a bad thing to hurt the most vulnerable people within this country. On a comparative, yes, the impact of this is that on a comparative, we have domestic investors redirecting investment into the country. We have people rebuilding our nation, developing the community, pumping energy into the development of human capital. Why? The second reason why this is bad is because when multinational companies come in and invest with it, or people invest in those multinational companies, what often happens is brain drain. This means to say that when these people come in and pick and choose the talent of your country, take them out of the country to work in where they're originally based in, this is bad because you're taking away the human capital and the potential development of this country to start with. So given the fact that the comparative is greater control over your own development, more control over the talent and human capital within your country, I think it's far more strategic, far more economically viable for you to control the capital that leaves your country and make sure that investors invest locally.
Call upon the member of opposition. Thank you.
Very simply. First, I'm just going to show you why the direction we took in closing was much more relevant and more impactful than opening government. And then I'll underpin the clashes vis-a-vis the entire op bench to tell you why we took those issues. Why was our direction more important? Because if you listen to opening government, they gave you a lot of good stuff about fostering better GDP for that country. But we would suggest, and rather controversially you might say, that GDP isn't the most important end goal. There's a reason why. Because GDP doesn't account for things like income inequality. GDP doesn't account for the most vulnerable individuals that are going to be affected by this policy. Singapore is a perfect example of a nation that has a bloody brilliant GDP, but doesn't account for the fact that according to a global index, 13% of our population live under the poverty line. But because our GDP is fine, the government can say that we're doing well, our GDP is going strong. That's an unfair metric to determine the quality of life of the most vulnerable, because no matter what happens in this debate, the individuals who are rich will always be able to move away and will always be able to be better in this condition. We need to talk about individuals that will be disproportionately hurt by this policy. The second reason why OG is not very relevant is because they didn't actually deal with the reciprocity argument on that side. We would suggest at this point that there's a disproportionate amount of leverage and hold that companies put over developing nations, and that's why it is antithetical to the interests of developing countries. What does this look like? And this portrayal of this hostage scenario only came in closing government. There had no response on that side. Because what we told you was this. For example, when you have Chinese corporations, big evil Chinese corporations, come into Africa, dictate terms and conditions of what the African people should do by holding African countries hostage, by by coercing them to not, for example, give tax break. These are the kinds of instances where they don't have political participation or they don't have that amount of capital to better the conditions of their life. So I'm not sure why they were willing to stand for this on that side. What underpins the entire opening opposition case, or like closing op 2, is this idea of reciprocity. Like if you don't help them, they also don't help you. Let's be clear. What is the impact of that harm? Because they weren't very clear what the impact is beyond suggesting that there's some loss of trade. We bit the bullet in Revan and told you that we're okay with some loss of trade because the trade that you get to fuel up developing countries by bolstering the GDP results in the very unequal treatment to the most vulnerable people. What I'm saying is not that GDP is unimportant. GDP is important, but I think vulnerable individuals that get disproportionately hurt are more important in this debate. I'm not sure why reciprocity or globalization is an a priori good that we must protect just because that we have reached this stage. Globalization is fine if your country is doing well. If you're a developing country where people get disproportionately hurt, I think it's fine to say that globalization has sometimes failed people disproportionately. What are the harms that we told you uniquely from this side of the house? No thanks. Okay. So another reason why we're different from OG. OGs, they got moral responsibility. They don't tell you who the moral responsibility is to. And this is very important. Because the moral responsibility here seems like moral responsibility to every citizen. We are explaining the harms that Revan told you that is unique to individuals who are living below the poverty line. So we have two clear harms in this debate. First, the reason, and I don't buy Nicholas's argument here, right? Like, you will prop up doom companies. Which state is so fucking stupid that if Proton is failing, the government will just prop up Proton nonsense. Like, that's just unrealistic in the world we live in today. Like, obviously, the company is doomed to fail. We probably won't want to fund that company. What they need to defend is that there's still a free market existing within the domestic economy. It's not like the moment you cannot check outside your country, your local company will only have like 1 or 2 niche industries that are doomed to fail. This is an unrealistic portrayal of the economic conditions we are in. No thanks. The reason why individuals are unwilling to make first mover advantage in these domestic developing countries is because the ways in which people predict market trends to determine whether they want to invest in these markets are usually volatile. That's why they're That's why they're afraid to take risks. That is why the kind of people who are willing to take the risk by investing in developing countries tend to be huge conglomerates that own unfettered amount of power by holding these people hostage. I know at this point, if I tell you hostage 3 times, you aren't going to credit it because there's no impact. So this is the impact. The impact of holding individuals hostage is you worsen the conditions for the people living in those civil society. And this is where Revan brought you the impact that wasn't dealt with on that side, which is that ultimately, you cause an issue of brain drain that is susceptible to exploitation by these companies, and that's particularly problematic because you allow for them to pressure things like lax labor laws, like forcing import tariffs that hurt only the individuals who don't have a say otherwise, because these are the most vulnerable people that need help. We are okay with trading up some degree of comfort or GDP for the people at the top if it means securing the basic livelihood or the basic capacity for people to not be shackled by a system like this. But the biggest impact is the suppression of justice. But Rebel also explored why it was far more harder for you to attain some sort of a justice. Okay, go.
So the whole Gulf case is dependent upon these investments succeeding. If these countries are a shit, as you say, why would these investments succeed? That's what you like the outcomes.
But if they are so shit that the investments, that money cannot solve the conditions of this particular, it's unlikely that investment outside can also help, right? So you have to acknowledge that there's some degree of success. The question is, why is it okay to redirect your stock value of capital to this particular domestic market to cut at your cake and eat it too? Okay, so second, they never dealt with this brain drain argument. Because all they came from that side is we're willing to trade it off. Like, debating 101, you need to tell me why you are willing to trade it off. Because brain drain literally is the biggest scourge of why developing countries don't succeed. I refuse to believe that countries like Malaysia and Indonesia have just worse human beings there and incapable people. It is not because of that. It is because the mobility of the capital file, of human capital, don't want to stay in their country because the systems in those particular nations don't allow for them to maximize their self-actualization and don't allow them to maximize their financial autonomy. That's why they prefer to invest in things like China or Singapore, not my loss, but still, Singapore. That's why we rather prefer a world and a context in which people have an active incentive to develop in those particular industries. Because when you allow your manpower and skilled labor force to leave those particular countries, government has less of an incentive to want to hold you back. And this is the problem. They say, the response to brain drain, government will fix it. That's closing government's border, right? We fix it now by ensuring that these people stay. Because there's no incentive for government to fix it on your world because the government is mobilized by lobby groups who are in the top strata of that community, who will never have an incentive to change conditions because they don't give a fuck about the poor people. The poor people have no political capital to bargain or lobby the government to do the changes that you want. That's why we need to step in and ensure that we curb this exploitation, we curb this brain drain. In this debate, the most important thing is the individuals who are shackled by a system of no alternatives, and that's what opposition puts them through. We are so proud to propose.
It's called on the opposition. Thank you.
We see that companies like MIDP, for example, from Malaysia, are finally being sold, for example, in digital marketplace Alibaba in China, is because of this economic relationship that is interdependent between those countries to be there at the first place. Also, we can see that Indomie getting sold in Nigeria, for example, Indomie getting sold in Australia. It is because those investors that is actively promoting and investing in foreign companies that are also promoting their own value, their own local markets at the end of the day. You need to tell me why you can stay relevant as a developing country when you have no bargaining power at all, when you have no bargaining chip, when no other countries value your country in the competition in global competition itself. Because as far as I know, the goal of the developing country itself is of course to become relevant and to be eventually become also developed and being able to compete with the international market, right? Now this is only possible when you do not actually protect yourself forever. It means that you need to also be able to develop, and we will prove to you why in CO side is the only side where we can let people actually develop. No, thank you, please sit down. Now, before I move on, I will firstly make some clarifications. I think they need to prove to us why at the end of the day these local people will still invest. Because I see a big contradiction, right? They try to claim to you that local investors do not want to invest locally because it is not profitable for them, for example. Now, why with the absence of this ability to invest outside, why they still want to invest inside if it is not profitable for them, right? But also they need to concede that not all local investors are altruistic because they are also profit driven. They cannot guarantee why, for example, by these local people investing, suddenly this business will also flourish, right? Because we need to also concede that not all foreign investors are also evil, because they always try to give you the characterization that look, they will exploit your business, they will exploit all your profit, for example. That is simply not true, because it is also their own money, right? I think if they exploit their business, the point that this business collapse, for example, they are also betting their own money there. So those foreign investors will not like destroy your local business as well, because they also have the incentive to grow in that country, right? They also have the incentive for their business to also grow in that country. So these foreign investors will not exploit you at the end of the day. But also, now, I think in this debate full of economical jargons and like make us confused, like which side it's investing to which side, I think I will divide my class today in a very simple division. Number one, which one ensures a better global economic prosperity, and number two, the local economic prosperity. No, thank you. What? First, global economic prosperity. I think what's the point of your local business flourishing at best, given if you buy the flood? If you stay irrelevant in global international community itself, right? If you stay irrelevant in the national economy, when you're excluded because you apply those protectionist mechanism, because it drains your ability to stay relevant. Realize that the moment when countries do not have interest to keep you as their trading partner, for example, because you do not want to invest in them, for example, it means that they will put things like tariffs, for example, they will put things like taxes, for example, when you want to export your goods to their country. This is what Nicholas is trying to tell you when he says things that you need certain terms and conditions in which to ensure reciprocality, right? Because, for example, when they see that there is no profit that can be, no mutual profit that can be gained from your country, they will be likely to put tariffs, high taxes to limit your export of goods in your country. As a result, it is very, very hard for your local business to also export their goods to another country. I'll take one from closing.
Okay, so what you call reciprocity is an asymmetry of power that allows certain nations to hold people in Africa hostage by making them work in sweatshops. Why is this justified?
Firstly, they need to prove to you why these countries will always hold these countries hostage. Because, like what I told you, I think they also have the incentive to keep that business still growing in that place, right? That's why, for example, of course, they're gonna just, import all those foreign workers from their country. They will eventually have to hire your labor also, for example, because it's cheaper, for example. And it is likely for them to also benefit the local people. They will have to hire the local people. They will still have to, for example, empower the local people itself. Like, of course, they will do trainings and etc. I think this is more likely to happen. No, thank you. That's why I believe that in terms of global economic prosperity in general, it is more likely for your local businesses to be able to get more profit at the end of the day, because they can do things easier. It is easier for them to export goods, for example, because there are lower tariffs, lower taxes, and whatnot. Second class is about the local economic prosperity. So this is the most important thing in this debate, right? Because we want to ensure local economic growth inside of the developing country itself. Now, having economical interdependency and tradings from foreign companies, it is the thing that allows developing countries to develop. Look, if you consider the moment when, for example, I consider the moment when, for example, foreign investors are coming, multinational companies are coming in your country, it is a good thing, because it forces the local people to compete and eventually develop their own niche market. This is what Nick is trying to tell you. Now, the idea of local economic growth can only exist when they are driven by a competition. And the idea of a competition, for example, can only happen when there are multinational companies that comes to your country and eventually have a transfer of knowledge in that country. Because, for example, no thank you. Because, for example, your local people will work in these multinational companies, getting the trainings, getting the transfer of knowledge, and eventually will be able to also develop the same kind of business, right? No thank you. That's why I believe that at the end of the day, it guarantees that niche market will be able to grow. Because the moment when they are pushed by these, for example, foreign multinational companies, they are forced to find their specialization in this niche market. No thank you. It means that finally these companies will be able to develop their own niche market, which they can specialize on, because they try to differentiate themselves from these foreign companies, right? Because you also concede that your developing countries do not have that much capital. Your developing countries do not have that much foreign economical capital compared to these foreign investors. Now, how can you ensure that your local businesses will also be able to develop without the existence of these competitions driven by these foreign multinational companies? Because if you apply protectionism now, like what we told you, it is so much harder for the government to abolish it later. Because now your local businesses are forced to like stay in the stagnant position. They are not able to grow because they have no competitors at all. Now, what did CO tell you so far in this debate? We told you that the bargaining power is very necessary. That's why we want to champion for reciprocity better, because at least at the end of the day, we lower tariffs that the other countries apply to us, for example. That's why we can ensure better economic relations under our side of the house, increasing our ability to export, increasing our ability to compete with the international market. That's why at the end of the day, economic growth, both globally and domestically, will only happen under CO. Thank you.
All right, we thank all speakers.